My name is Dr.G. Welcome to That's Unusual, my podcast uncovering the unusual stories behind the world's most interesting people. On this show, we celebrate what makes us different and how we convert those differences into unexpected opportunities. Welcome to That's Unusual. Before we get started, if you're enjoying these episodes, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, and leave me a review. It gives me a good sense of what's working and what's not working. My esteemed guest today is Brian Roeder, a real estate developer who now turned winery entrepreneur who dropped everything to follow his passion. Located in the scenic hills of Virginia wine country, he is the co-founder of Barrel Oak Winery, commonly referred to as BOW for its dog-friendly environment. If you're anything like me, in our heads we all have a preconceived notion of what a winery experience is or should be like. Brian has challenged every assumption of that experience by reinventing the model to be centered around his living room experience and less about stiff traditions and rituals. In this episode, Brian shares with us both the ups and downs of his roller coaster ride in pursuit of his dream, how he reimagined the winery experience using a hospitality model centered around community and conversation, and key lessons that he learned along the way that has helped him shape his career. As you listen to this episode, I ask that you reflect on your own unusual stories and unique qualities that can help open doors to unexpected opportunities. And so with that, let's get started. Welcome to That's Unusual. I have with me today as my guest, Brian Roeder. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, Gotham. How are you, sir?
I am doing fantastic. I'm so excited that you took the time out to join us on the show. I think you're doing some amazing things that our listeners and audience would love to hear about. And so I want to jump right in here and talk about what it is that you do. And that's, having founded and owned a vineyard in the beautiful scenic landscapes of Virginia in Fauquier County, and it's called Barrel Oak Winery. And this is, for those who are listening, have never heard of Barrel Oak Winery, certainly something that you should check out. It is one of the most amazing, different winery experiences that at least I've ever been to that actually had a very transformational impact on me in terms of how I look at wineries and vineyards. And so I just want Brian to share a little bit about what Barrel Oak Winery is, why it's different, and what it is that he's trying to accomplish with such a venue.
Thanks, Gotham. Well, my wife and I moved out here about 10 years ago with the intent of starting a vineyard and winery. She and I were living in South Arlington, and it was her dream to grow grapes. And I wanted to make her dream real. I was trying to help empower her in her life, get her away from being a worker bee and getting her closer to being able to live her dream, which is something I've been fortunate. I've been able to do a good chunk of my life. I don't know why exactly, but I've really been able to pursue my dreams. And so when I realized what her dream was, I wanted to make it real. And the finances didn't add up to just grow grapes. So instead, what we decided is that we would grow grapes and also make wine. She willingly embraced the idea of becoming a winemaker. And fortunately, because she's really bright and very hardworking, she was able to do that quite well without a lot of experience. And we found the property. We spent about 2 years getting ready to launch, and we opened in the spring of 2008, Memorial Weekend. And our goal was to create a place that in some ways looked like our experience with wine. We hadn't spent our lives together going to the great chateaus of Europe or even, although I'm from California and I'd been to Napa many times, she and I had never gone together. But instead, our experience was enjoying wine in our living room with our friends. And they'd come over with their kids and their dogs. Sharon's 9 years younger than me. She was in her early 30s. I was in my early 40s when we tackled this. And we just decided that what we wanted to do was to have a winery where people could come and relax and stay and enjoy themselves. Spend some time. This idea of come in, taste, buy, and get out wasn't appealing to us. Instead, what we wanted was a place like our own living room. People could come and stay, meet friends, meet family, maybe strike up a conversation with strangers. The result was Barrel Oak. And we did a couple things right. We did a lot of things wrong. But we spent a lot of time talking about where we wanted to end up, what success would look like. We talked about what it would feel like. What we really tried to imagine an outcome that we would be happy with. And even though ultimately, we kind of really missed the mark in terms of being happy, because she and I are now separated, divorcing, even though we get along great. We just, the pressure of all this and other things finally took their toll.
Hmm.
Nonetheless, what we did do right was we did get that vision of a place where people would come and relax and stay and make a wonderful experience out of it. As we say, we wrap great wine in a great experience, and that's really been at the heart of the whole idea since we started.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I want to get into some of that journey and some of the lessons that you've learned over the course of building out the business, both in terms of what you learned from a professional standpoint as well as from a personal standpoint, and some of the hardships that went through to make this the success or the vision that you wanted to achieve. I almost feel like to some degree it's the element of naivety in terms of what a vineyard or expectation of what a vineyard should be.
Yeah.
Almost played to your advantage in the sense that you came with no preconceived notion of what a winery or vineyard should look like. And you just sort of designed it based on a living room experience, which we can all relate to.
Yep.
And I think it just has this magical component where it's not stuffy. It's not necessarily an etiquette-driven vineyard, but really breaking the mold for a new social norm in terms of, using wine as an enabler to strike new relationships, new friendships, drive community, and have fun. And so can you tell us, what is so different? What makes Barrel Oak Winery, or BOW in short, because of the dog-friendly nature,
right,
what makes it so different from everything else that you've experienced, especially in the surrounding community of Virginia?
Well, you touched on something that's very interesting, and I never thought of this when we got into this, but our business model was actually quite disruptive to the wine industry.
Yeah.
We didn't set out to do that, and I didn't even realize that for quite a while, but it set up a lot of pushback and resentment in certain quarters, because the traditional model was one in which someone is a wine geek. They start out learning about wine, tasting wine, appreciating wine. Then next thing you know, they're making some wine out of box juice in their basement. Then they're traveling to Europe and going to great chateaus and loving that whole chateau experience. When you think about it, it's all about worshiping the wine. And then they come back and they start helping somebody up the road harvest out in the countryside. Then they're buying grapes to make their own barrel out in the garage. So this progresses to the point where a lot of people retire, quote unquote, into this business in their 50s or 60s after they've had some success in other fields. And they find themselves wanting to recreate that chateau experience, which is really a geek experience, one in which, you're being told about the quality of the wine and what you should appreciate about it. The problem is that the people who get into this business and are geeking about it, and I'm one of them. I love wine. I've learned a lot, and I want to learn more throughout my whole life. But the problem is most people that come to our wineries aren't geeks, and they're not there to have us tell them what good wine should be. And as a result, it's traditionally become an environment in which people really feel like they're being spoken down to. Now, one of the really unique things that happened at Barrel Oak, without understanding the consequences, we knew that we wanted to have a dog-friendly environment. And we're known pretty much as the most dog-friendly winery in Virginia. And the reason why that's important is the power that has to start conversations and dialogues between our customers. What'll happen is someone will walk through the door first time or 50th time. And we do have customers who've been through the door well over 50 times. It's crazy. But somebody will walk through the door and they'll see a dog over there sitting at the feet of its owner who's having a tasting at the wine bar. And they'll walk over and the dog will look like a dog they had when they were young. And they'll walk up to the owner and say, "May I pet your dog?" And the owner says, "Sure, of course." And then I've seen it happen a million times. They'll get down on their knees and they'll squat down and they'll start petting the dog and talking to the dog, who's loving this, of course. And then they look up at the owner and they say, "What's your dog's name?" And they say, Ralph is the name of the dog, whatever. And then they start talking to Ralph and rubbing Ralph's ears. And the owner's loving it because, their dog's getting all this attention. And the two people start talking. And it's really extraordinary. I don't know. Have you heard about the third space, Gotham, this concept?
Kind of like what Howard Schultz had done with Starbucks, like the concept of third space.
I tell people we're the third space on steroids. And the reason for that is that, the first space, I think, is home. Second is work. Third is where we choose to be when we're in neither of those places. And it's not just a place we have to be like a grocery store or a gas station. It's a place where we go to hang out and to do other things that matter to us. And the reason why Barrel Oak is the third space on steroids is that unlike Starbucks or Panera or some of these other places that have successfully follow this third space model. At our place, people who are strangers end up talking to each other. It's very busy on a Saturday. People share tables, and there are just all these different ways. Plus, unlike most wineries, we embrace children and families. And so you have multi-generational tables of people sitting there, and it just all leads to people talking to each other. When you walk through the door, it's a cacophony. Many of the traditional wineries, you walk through the door, it's very quiet and reverential. You walk into Barrel Oak, I see people stop, and they kind of pause, and they look around, and they're trying to figure out why it's so loud, with people laughing and kids laughing and dogs barking, and it's a very different experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the atmosphere is so magical. I mean, it is. You can walk around and intermix with folks, that are complete strangers, but become quick friends just because of the sort of the elements that you've got around. You got wine. You now actually have a brewery, a tap house in your winery, which is completely unusual. I've never seen it before. Tell us about your thinking about putting a brewery inside or alongside a winery at Barrel Oak.
I think part of the interesting thing about owning a business is that hopefully it's interesting enough that you're constantly trying to figure out what the heck it is you're doing. You're revisiting it. And I've done that all along. I've revisited the business constantly, trying to understand what it is that we've been creating. So, we started with a dream. Then we had a business once we got it open. Then after a couple of years, I realized we were building a brand. And 2 or 3 years after that, I realized that we were building a hospitality business that traded in very good wine. This idea of great wine wrapped in a great experience. And what's interesting is that if you self-define yourself, that has a great deal to do with then what it is you feel you can and cannot do, whether it's in business or in life, I find. And I've always been somebody who's tried to avoid self-definition so I could open up the door to other possibilities. That's why I'm on my 8th or 9th career now. And with a winery, once I realized and shared with my senior staff and my wife that what we had created was a hospitality business, it made it possible for her to look at things other than just the idea of making wine. And as a result, when we looked at the most obvious thing that we had heard from our clients over the previous 6 years, which was, boy, I love beer. If you serve beer, I'd come here more often. Or people saying, boy, my spouse won't come because they only drink beer. It became a no-brainer to explore how we can make beer. Fortunately, right about that time, Virginia changed the laws so that farmers could get a farm license to make beer if they grew hops or other components of the beer making process. And so for the first time, an agricultural farmer could open up a brewery. And we asked for a ruling from ABC, and they said, sure enough, because you're already a farm winery, and now you're going to have a license as a farm brewery, you can not only produce but also serve the beer to the people in the winery so they can enjoy either wine or beer at the same table. And that was a first. That hasn't been done before in Virginia. And now that we're doing it, I imagine others may also join us, but we're the first to come to market on that. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of other wineries are probably going to follow suit very quickly once they realize the value that it's providing to their customers. And again, it's about hospitality. And I think, from sort of an outsider standpoint, I think one of the main secret sauces that you've recognized and identified in terms of what you're delivering is that ultimately all you do is just listen to your customers and what your customers want. And I think if you look to sort of the traditional norms of typical vineyards, of what we envision or expect as typical vineyards out in Sonoma County or Napa or, other wine regions of the country, typically what they do is they say, you as a customer morph to our culture as a wine culture. What you're basically saying is, we as a vineyard, we're morph to the culture of what our customers ultimately want. And then you deliver for that as being a hospitality. It's almost looking at it from the inverse perspective of what's typically been done in the vineyard business.
Well, you see that in a lot of business successes around the country. You mentioned Starbucks earlier. I mean, I haven't read the book, I guess he's got his book and whatnot that people talk about, but I can only imagine, that's at the heart of Starbucks and these other businesses where they say, instead of them saying it's about us, they say, well, it's about our customer. Now, the other thing that's interesting about the wine business, because what I call it us wine geeks, because so often we spend so much of our life investing and learning about, oftentimes, and not all, but many then feel like it really is about me. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does lead to a very, very different set of consequences. And getting back to my point, about self-definition, because we have self-defined as being a hospitality business that makes and sells and provides really great wine. It opens up the possibility of then being able to look at other components such as beer. I don't worry, frankly, at the end of the day about too many wineries starting to do beer, because the reality is those owners, which is completely valid, are going to say, we're a winery. We don't do beer. And I've actually already heard that. And at first I was a little concerned about the competition, opening up all of them with breweries. And now I'm starting to think, that may not be so easy, because, again, we're a winery, not a brewery. Well, if that's your definition, then that's your outcome.
Well, and I imagine also some of the hurdles that you have is just challenging the cultural norms. Like our typical behaviors is that you almost have to educate the population to say, hey, now you can come to a winery and we're also a brewery, which is something that your customers or wine customers are typically not accustomed to. And it's a little bit of a, an uphill behavioral change that you're ultimately going to have to face here. I want to take obviously challenging cultural norms in terms of doing things differently for an industry that has oftentimes been, very much grounded on tradition and ritual over the course of centuries. You've tackled it sort of head on. And obviously, you look at education, you look at healthcare. I mean, all of these are industries that, even though it's not a vineyard or winery, but they also face similar types of, cultural hurdles in order to sort of move forward and create progress and ultimately listen to your customer. I want to sort of delve into a little bit of the journey that you took to get here, because it sounds all wonderful, but this was not an easy journey for you. And I want you to share with our listeners, what you went through, what are some of the challenges that you confronted, and some of the key lessons that you took away.
What's interesting, actually, and this is something most people don't know about me, is that even though I'm a farmer and I'm a producer of wine, and then I have a business that sells the wine, which is interesting because I'm actually running 5 businesses when you think about it. Even though that's what I do, my avocation, I have a degree from UC Santa Cruz in political science and Georgetown, a master's degree in international affairs. So I actually spend a huge amount of time looking at things having to do with national policy and international policy. And I'm fascinated by those issues. And it's led me down a very varied path. It was actually Georgetown that brought me to DC, and I never had the idea that I'd end up going back to the land where my great-grandparents made their living. After 3 generations, here I am with my family back on the land. And I feel really grateful that I've been able to do that. It's been an amazing journey. But I mean, I've been in the restaurant business. I've been in construction, hands-on construction, project management, nonprofit management. I've dabbled in politics. I've done a lot of different things, a lot of board management, some executive training and other things. And it's all just been part of a life of, being open to what comes my way, as I'm open to working with and getting to know people, and then finding various skills that I really enjoy and I want to explore and pursue. When we opened the winery, I said we were disruptive, partially because we did bring in a lot of new concepts that hadn't really been there before, not by intention, just it seemed like they were smart ideas. And it did lead to a lot of pushback. What's interesting, Fauquier County has traditionally been a zero-growth community, and even though it has grown, the leadership has tried to take a zero-growth position of opposing not just residences, but also businesses coming into the community. And we put up a fairly high-profile business on a hillside right on the edge of I-66, beautiful views up at the ridge line. But a lot of people driving by could see us, which was the intent, because they'd see us up here and go, what's that? Let's go check that out. But there were a certain number of influentials within our community who didn't like that we had done this on this hilltop. And even though our winery is very much in keeping with other structures here in the community, more of a traditional design, those people organized and did what they've done many times in the past. They set out to make a point of showing that these types of businesses, such as the one we had opened, were not going to be accepted in this community. And it's ironic because the community itself, the almost 68,000 people that live here, the vast majority of them do know about us and have embraced our business. But this very influential small group of often quite wealthy individuals who just don't like change, they came after us through the elected politicians and they got an ordinance passed that effectively was going to put us out of business. And, you never realize until you find your back is truly against the wall and you stand to lose everything. You never realize really what you're capable of. And it was a wonderful outcome because we succeeded ultimately in suing, and the county settled with us and allowed us to go back to doing everything we'd ever done without complaint from our immediate neighbors, just these individuals who lived elsewhere in the county but didn't like our presence. So we did ultimately succeed, but boy, it really did have a toll. It's where the marriage started to struggle, and it also is where I discovered things about myself that I wish I'd never had to learn about, how hard I could be, and about, it's kind of that loss of innocence. I managed to get to the age of about 47, 48 without having really, I'd had some lessons that had hardened my skin, but that was one where I realized that I was a fighter. I'd always thought of myself as a lover, and I realized I was a fighter, and I didn't like that about myself. And even today, if someone comes after me or someone I love or something that I care about, I'm all in. I'm going after them, and I don't like that about my personality, but it came out during that struggle, and I've never been able to put it back into Pandora's box.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you learn about yourself in more ways than you expected along this journey. I'm reminded, there's this great quote, and I just looked it up, from Aaron Sorkin, who gave a commencement speech, and he said, "Take risk, dare to fail. Remember, the first person through the wall always gets hurt." And I think certainly in this experience, both from a personal standpoint as well as a professional standpoint from the winery business, in many ways, you were the first person through the wall and coming out with a lot of scars, but a lot of important scars of lessons that you take with you in whatever you pursue, and lessons for all of us to learn from as well. Looking back at your career, looking back at what you just went through over the past several years with a Barrel Oak, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, yeah, there would be some things I might have done differently. I probably would have, been a little more humble at the beginning. I think I've acquired a fair amount of humility over the last 8 years that was seriously lacking prior to that. When you have people come up to you almost every day, at least on the weekends, when I'm really down there quite a bit. I keep my office on the property. I'm up here working throughout the week, but on the weekends I'm down there interacting with my customers and my staff. The number of people who walk up to me and take my hand and thank me for what I've created and how it makes them feel and how grateful they are they can bring their families there and their dogs and everything. It's really extraordinary. And the only place that I could ever imagine someone arriving after they have that experience over and over and over again is a deep sense of gratitude. And that really has added to my sense of, I'm not a humble person, but I feel deep gratitude and humility in the face of such kindness coming from strangers, wanting me to know that they appreciate what we've created. And that wasn't the goal that we set out with, but to have a place that does touch people's lives in that way is an extraordinary experience, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. And so, I think at the beginning, I could have used a little bit of listen more, speak less. That's always been a challenge I've faced. I'm one of these people who always believed that words had power and I could use them. As I've gotten older, I've moved away from that, but it's been a long struggle. And so now that I'm at a place where, being successful is an extraordinary experience, and it's experienced in a variety of ways by people, of course. We all self-define. I feel successful because so many people come to our business and really appreciate what we've done, and it makes them feel really good. And so being successful is so strange because then people look at you as successful. And before this, I was the exact same person. I saw myself the same way, really, in many ways. I don't think anybody would have thought of me as being a successful businessman. But even though I was a serial small business entrepreneur, but when you get there, the way that people look at you is different. And I don't seek that. And I'm really surprised when that happens. But it also gives me the opportunity then to try and help others because they actually seek me out. And I do want to help others as they try and be successful getting into this business or something else is going on in their lives that I might be able to help with. I am part of a group that does actively work to help small and startup businesses here in the county through one of our local chambers. And, it's a sense of giving back because I've been fortunate enough to be able to get to this point where I have a business that's working and that's succeeding. So I would have probably, like I said, been a little bit more quiet and humble in the beginning, but hopefully I'm learning something as time passes, Gotham.
Yeah, I think that's incredible lessons that you've just shared across. And I hope everyone listening essentially understands some of the hardships and turmoil and sweat that goes into building a sort of disruptive business model as you had with Barrel Oak. You alluded to essentially having 8 careers in your life. I mean, what's the next chapter for Brian Roeder? Are you still finishing up your 8th chapter? What's the 9th chapter? What do you see ahead?
Well, the next chapter is one I'm really looking forward to. A third of my life was spent on the West Coast, where I grew up with a lot of international travel. Roughly a third of my life has been here on the East Coast since the early 90s. With my divorce, the winery actually is for sale. We're looking for someone who'll come in and take the wonderful base we've created and build upon it with other opportunities to expand, such as a lodge or perhaps a wedding facility, or even taking the brand, which is so well known, and spreading it throughout the region, if not the nation, as a wholesale brand. There are a lot of possibilities for the next owner with deeper pockets than I have. But with the sale of the business and Sharon and I going our own ways, I'm going back to the West Coast, back to my hometown of Santa Cruz, California. My parents are still healthy and in their 70s. I have lots of brothers and stepsisters and lots of nieces and nephews. And so I'm going to go back, got them, and I'm fortunate. Our family has a large ranch on the mountainside looking over the Monterey Bay, and I plan to plant about 100 acres of Pinot Noir and truly become a farmer. Instead of sitting at my office at my computer all day working on the finances and in meetings, I plan to go back and get my hands in the soil, which was part of the original dream that I've had to give up with the complexity of my business. And I plan to spend the rest of my life involved with grapes and wine because I love the industry. I've got the bug. But instead of dealing with the public, selling and marketing, instead I'll be focused upon making hopefully some of the best Pinot Noir in the world. And I think I've got a site there that I've identified which will be possible to do that.
Well, that sounds like a great next chapter, and I can't wait to sip some of that new wine that you produce out there, and I would love to come out and visit there. But thank you so much for all this knowledge, Brian. Incredible backstory, incredible story that you've shared along the way. As most of my guests and listeners know, we always wrap up the conversation with a set of rapid fire fill in the blanks. So if you're up for it, I would love to take you through some of those and go through the 5 questions.
All right, I'll do the best I can. Thank you.
First question here is, the best piece of advice I ever received was?
Yeah, here you go. Words have meaning and meanings have consequences. So words have consequences.
Yeah, that's great. And you certainly shared some stories around that during our conversation.
Yeah.
All right, next one. I'm most curious about?
Everything.
Everything. All right. Well, I guess that also explains the 8, 9, 10 ongoing careers you've got. Wherever your curious mind takes you, you go and pursue it.
I haven't found anything yet that really bored me too much.
All right. Third one is, if I had to write a book about myself, if you had to write an autobiography essentially about yourself, the title of the book would be?
Yeah, I hope that this is, I'm sure this is a family podcast, but I got to say it anyway, balls deep.
Balls deep. You can say it on this podcast. That's perfectly fine. Explain, what would be in the book?
It'd be about engaging fully in life and taking risks and realizing that as I view life, I'm more of a humanist than anything else. And I think that we have the power to create heaven or hell here on earth. And it's not about what comes afterwards, which I have no confidence is anything other than nothing, perhaps. Rather, it's about what we do here. And so this is where we make a difference. And balls deep is a fun way of saying go for it. Go all the way. Do the best you can. Try and make a difference. Try and make a difference for the good. Because in life, at some point, if we don't figure it out right away, at some point, I think we figure out what right and wrong is. And once we do, it's an obligation upon us to try and do the right things and to do them in a positive way. So, and that involves just always going in far and doing as good as you can. So that's why.
Well, I love that. And for some reason, I think the title of the book might still be available. So I'd go and grab that. All right, next, 2 more to go. So the next one is, if you could invite 3 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would you invite and what would you talk about? And in fact, some people have even brought up things instead of people. So use your imagination, whoever you want.
All right. Well, I think I'll stick with people. Because I love to talk, and I love ideas. So, I really love political philosophy and the physical sciences both. So I think I'd invite Aristotle, Einstein, and Jean-Paul Sartre, and I think it'd be one hell of a dinner.
It absolutely would. What would you talk about?
We talk about the meaning of life. I mean, at the heart of us all, as humans, I think that's the big question. What does it all mean? Aristotle was the first philosopher that really got my attention. I mean, I read Plato too, but Aristotle, talked about self-actualization with the acorn falling from the oak, and whether or not that was a natural process or it was something that could have influences upon it. And he talked about nature and nurture. And that's where I first started thinking about the most basic of questions about, who are we? And then Jean-Paul Sartre is about as far as I got with philosophy, even though there are many great thinkers since him asking the same question. And, he appealed to me because he said that a great deal of this was, in fact, about self-actualization, about our ability to take this experience and to act upon it thoughtfully in a way that could lead to profound change in the human experience, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. And then the idea of taking responsibility for that, because it's an incredibly powerful idea that truly can be impactful in positive and negative ways on others. So that's where Jean-Paul came in. And then you throw in Einstein, because the guy just is about the most brilliant human being to ever wander around. And of course, he dabbled in philosophy, even as he showed us that, all the physical sciences were tied together in ways that even now we're only starting to understand. So I just think it'd be, I'd get out my very best bottles of wine and I would cook up a great steak dinner. And I think we would have one hell of a conversation.
I couldn't agree more. I think it would be. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So last fill in the blank for you. So as you know, on this podcast, we celebrate all those things that make us different, that make us unique. How would you fill in the following sentence? I'm unusual because.
Well, I don't know if I'm unusual about this. I used to be certain I was. Now I'm less certain, but I still think it's what makes me at the very least in some ways unique. I really believe in living on one's own terms and trying to do that with no regrets. I've tried really hard to never conform to self-control under, this kind of sense of being submitted to social opprobrium for not following social norms. I'm not a weirdo and I'm not rejecting society, but at the same time, I've also tried to live a life where I did that self-definition process and took risks. And I think as a result, it's allowed me to do a lot of things that otherwise I might not have allowed myself to do. And I look at people with great potential. One of my dearest friends was deeply closeted for many years and such a gifted human. And finally, when he really allowed himself to look at himself as just a brilliant and capable and gifted and artistic gay man, his whole life changed. And not only for him personally and his happiness, but all of that creativity really started to flow out of him. And that's the way that I think when we set aside some of those considerations of self-restriction, we make it possible for extraordinary things to happen.
Yeah, very well said. Certainly a quality that I admire of yours.
Thank you, God.
Having known you for the past couple of years. So, Brian, it is always a delight to talk with you, and thank you so much for joining the show. But you know what? Before we wrap up here, if anybody wanted to learn more about you, about Barrel Oak, anything else that you're involved with, where would you direct them to go?
Well, thanks for asking, Gotham. Well, Barrel Oak, first off, Barrel Oak is located 1 hour west of D.C. on I-66. So you head straight out, heading westward from D.C. into Virginia's horse and wine country, Fauquier County in particular. And that's where we are. And you can find us at barreloak.com, like oak barrel, but Barrel Oak. And I'm happy to give my personal number. It's 703-798-8308. And finally, my email is Brian with an I at barreloak.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Brian.
A real pleasure, Gotham. And by the way, you are an inspiration to me. I love what you're creating. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to seeing you and your family out here again soon.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Appreciate it. Hi again, it's me, Dr. G. If you are still listening, I'm hoping it's because you enjoyed this podcast. If you would like to hear future episodes, you could really help me out by subscribing to the That's Unusual podcast on iTunes and leaving a review. It goes a long way in helping me get the word out from avid listeners like you. As a thank you, I will be selecting one new reviewer each week at random for a free private 15-minute phone conversation where you can ask me anything and get professional advice on your career or business to help you stand out and make a difference. Also, if you want to be notified of any future episodes, please visit that'sunusualpodcast.com and sign up to receive updates on new episode releases. Until next time, remember to always think unusual.